Servus, kia ora, how's it going? Simon from Rough Guitars here again. This is going to be the first video in my series on how I built these rough guitars together. We're going to start the worst first, and let's do a fret job. Okay, let's get into it. So first things first, we'll go through a list of the basic tools you need to get this job done. This is a notched straight edge or ruler. This is to make sure your neck is absolutely straight before you get started. There we have a flat metal file, and here we have radial gauges. This is to measure and check the radius of your fretboard, and a radial sanding block that should of course match the radius of your fretboard. And here we have a fret rocker, but more about that in a minute. Here's a couple of different types of fret files. This one's a bit aggressive. This one's perfect. This is a great tool. This is from Crimson Guitars in England. Can't recommend it enough. 3434 3M painter's tape. This is a very good, a little bit expensive, but it leaves no residue. Felt pens, different colours, and different grades of sandpaper from 400 through to 2500. And with all that, you can get started. First things first, we have to get rid of this old plastic nut that came on the guitar. It's very important to score around the edges of it with a razor blade. This is to make sure that when you knock it off, that it doesn't take any paint or guitar finish with it. So score very carefully around each edge of the nut. Make sure it's separated from the headstock, the fretboard, the bindings at the side. Again, slowly and carefully, you don't want to mark up the guitar. So once that's finished, get a soft piece of wood and give it a bit of a knock, and it should just pop right off. Some of them are glued in harder than others, but there we go. Piece of shit plastic, get rid of it. So the next stage of the operation is to straighten the neck up. You're going to have to do a bit of work with the truss rod here. If you're not too sure how to use your truss rod, or you're not confident about turning it yourself, go back and start there, because this is a very important step. Don't be scared of your truss rod. It's really difficult to break it. You have to be really hammering on it, screwing it really hard. Okay, low and slow is the way to go. But as you can see here, I have a bit of back bow. There's quite a bit of space in between the last edge. After straightening the neck, we're going to cover the guitar up. Make sure it's all protected before you start filing. So as I said before, I'm using 3434 3M painter's tape for this job. In fact, it's essential for any guitar work. It's available on Amazon. It's not so cheap, but it's very good, stable tape, and doesn't leave residues as you peel it back off again. And then we get onto the neck. You have to just pull strips of tape off, big enough to cover the neck from side to side. Make sure every single millimetre of the fingerboard is covered with tape. You have to be accurate, do it really from edge of the fret to the edge of the fret. At the bottom of the neck, you're going to need a couple of strips of tape for each segment of the fingerboard. At the top of the neck, you're going to need to cut them smaller with a straight edge, with a razor blade or a carpet knife, something like that. So once you've finished the fingerboard itself, of course, run a couple of strips of tape along the side of the neck as well, so that none of the binding or the neck finish is damaged as you're filing. And here is how it looks as it's finished. Nice and clean, nothing from the fingerboard showing except for the frets. So that task is completed, and we're nearly ready to start on the actual job itself. As you can see, every piece of the guitar that I could possibly come in contact with a file is protected. Okay, checking the radius of the neck here. This is of course not necessary. I'm just doing this to show you guys at home how these gauges work. These are 12-inch radius, standard Les Paul radius. So just a quick graphical interlude here just to explain exactly what we're doing. You see here is a representation of 3 frets from the side, and as you can see they're of a slightly different heights. So what we're going to do is take the top off each fret, that in the end they are exactly the same height, just like so. Next step, take your permanent marker, your felt pen, and run a line from end to end across every fret. So now we've marked off every fret. The next step is we're going to take our 12-inch radial sanding block that of course matches the 12-inch radius of the neck, and we're going to make a few light passes up and down the fretboard here. Very light, no weight, no pressure, just give it a rub up and down a few times, and that's going to show us exactly what sort of condition the frets are in. Of course, where the felt pen is rubbed off with the sandpaper, that's going to mark the high points in the frets, and it's going to identify any problem areas you're going to have. So now we've got a bit of an idea of how much work we need to do. I'm going to start at the bottom of the neck with the fret rocker. Take the first 2 frets as the basics point, and you need to level all the rest of the frets off to this. So moving backwards and forwards across the neck, like 4 or 5 places in each fret, give it a bit of a rock and you can see whether there's any high points. So here is where my technique differs from a lot of other people's. When I identify a high spot in the fret, I file it immediately. A lot of people will say go down the whole neck, mark all your high points and then start filing. But when you think about it, you're working from a set point, so every fret you file after that is going to affect the rest of the chain down the line, you know. So there you see I've made a couple of little marks on the tape, just on the high point of the fret there, and very, very lightly and slowly I'm just filing that area of the fret. You can still hear the rattle as the fret rocker is rocking. A little bit more needs to come off. I'm not too sure about the exact measurements here, but we're really talking about more or less microns, tenths of millimeters. It's important to be accurate. And that is pretty much it. That's the guts of the matter. The technique is mechanically simple, the theory to it all. It's just very tedious and time-consuming work. Just one at a time, slowly work your way up the neck, rocking, placing the fret rocker over each three frets, one step at a time, rocking it, checking where the frets are high, marking it, filing it. You're going to find some frets just need a very little piece off. Other frets are high from end to end and the whole fret needs to be filed down. That's why I check the frets right across the board, not just in the middle and on both sides. I can't repeat this enough, it's important to be as accurate as humanly possible for the best results. So you can see I've marked the whole tape on from end to end because that fret was a particularly problematic one. As you can see from my technique here, I'm trying to follow the radius of the fret across on a slight angle, but really I can't say enough that you should not push hard. A light touch is best. It's much better to take a little bit of time and get it right than to put lots of pressure on the file and take too much off and then you're buggered. So my experience with these guitars made in China is that the top of the neck is always more work than the bottom of the neck for whatever reason, but the last 6 or 8 frets you can see how much lines there are on the tape there, how much areas that I've got to work on. Most of them are right across. File, check, file, check again. As I said, the top of the neck is normally a lot more work than the bottom of the neck. You can see how much lines there are on the tape there. How many high pieces, how many high frets. So then at some point you're going to be finished. One last check with the fret rocker. When you've done your job correctly, you will be going from end to end of the neck without the fret rocker moving at all. Of course, a little bit of a touch up here and there. And so once that job is complete, and you can go from end to end from the neck without the fret rocker making any noise or making any rocking at all, your fret leveling is complete. Okay, graphical interlude number 2. This is to demonstrate the next phase of the operation, which is called crowning. So we're going to take the edges off the top of the frets, prepare for a more rounded fret shape in the end. After filing each side of the fret on an angle, they will look a little bit like this. Okay, before you crown the frets, you have to again go from side to side with a marker pen and colour each fret in with a stripe of ink. So now using the fret file, triangular shape with the rounded edges, we're going to use the angle of the fret file and take the edges off both sides of each fret, just like I showed you in the graphic before. I usually go up the guitar down one side of the frets, turn the guitar round and then go back up the same way and do the other sides of the frets. This is just because it's easier for being a right-hander to do it like this. And so spin the guitar round and from the other side. And so this is to show you why you mark them with pen again. You can see each fret as you take both sides off, you should be left with just a very thin line of ink down the middle of each fret. Graphical interlude number 3. This is the last stage of the crowning process. This is where we're going to take all the edges off the frets that we've filed and leave them nice and rounded. A little bit like this. Some people use abrasive rubbers for this. I prefer just a little piece of sandpaper under your finger. You get a much more better feel for the fret you're sanding when it's directly applied pressure from your finger. You get a much better feel for what you're doing. Starting with a 180 grit, this is just to take any of the more obvious file scratches out of the frets. You have to be careful here as well, not too much pressure. You don't want to take really any more material off the frets now that they're perfectly level. Carefully take off any very obvious marks, any scratches or abrasive file marks that you can see. Work your way methodically down the neck from one end to the other. This is quite tiring and tedious work, and you will get blisters on your fingers. So we'll get in close here and have a look at the condition of the frets at the moment. You see a couple of little pits and knocks there, but nothing you can't get out with sandpaper. But all the aggressive file scratches, everything, they've been taken out now. So give it a bit of wipe off, get rid of the metal dust, And let the fun begin. Here we have the first pass with a 400 grain sandpaper. I find it very important to not only go from side to side, but also up and down the neck. This is where using your fingers instead of a sanding block is more accurate, I would say, at this stage of the game. You can really feel the frets under your fingers. With pushing in with your fingers, you can get down in between the frets onto the fretboard and really round off the edges that you've left with the file. Go along the edges of the frets as well. It's going to save you a bit of work later with the dressing. So with each grade of sandpaper, I go up the neck, back down the neck, and then from side to side, up the neck and down the neck. So and now onto the next grade, the 800 sandpaper. Same procedure. And of course, in between, give it a good wipe down with a dry cloth as well to get rid of the metal dust that will accumulate on top of the frets. And on it goes. I normally start with the sandpaper at 400, the polishing sandpaper. Of course, you need something a little bit more coarse to get the marks out of the frets from the file, but for the actual polishing stages, I start with a 400, then 800, then 1000, then 1200, 1500, 2000, and finally 2500. Some may say that's a little bit excessive, but yeah, if you're taking so long to do it fucking properly. Nice and shiny. Getting close. Okay, getting down to the last grade of sandpaper here, the 2500. My fingers hurt just watching this again. And once again with a dry cloth. Give them a wipe down, get rid of any dust. So the last stage, the procedure is a polish. Here I have some metal and aluminium polish. Need 2 clean rags, one to apply, one to wipe off. And just a little dab on the cloth for each fret. Wipe it up and down a few times. Make sure the whole fret's covered. It's good to leave it on for a few couple of minutes just to let it work in a bit. Normally you can do 4 or 5 frets at a time and then go back and clean them off again. But what the hell, I just go up and down, do the whole lot. Then with your dry, clean cloth, polish every fret, wipe all the polish back off it again, and you will see that they are oh so shiny. So now we're finished, we can get all this tape back off. Now all the tape's been removed, we can clean and condition the fretboard itself. What I like to use to clean the fretboard is good old Zippo lighter fluid. Some people will be screaming and tearing their hair out at the moment, but it's the best stuff I've come across. It's such a strong solvent, it doesn't hurt the wood, it evaporates straight away. Just squirt a little bit onto a dry, clean rag and get into each fret there and give it a good clean off. This will absolutely get rid of any little pieces of residue left over from the tape and any other gunk or shit that's been accumulating in your fretboard. You can see it evaporates almost instantaneously. It's really not detrimental to the wood at all. So give it a good clean down one last time with a dry and clean rag. And to condition the fretboard, we will be using Dunlop 65 lemon oil. This is specially for instruments. Give the fretboard a good soaking with this, can't do any harm. The wood will soak in what it needs and the rest you rub off. So apply liberally to the entire fretboard, let it sit for a few minutes. you can actually see it soaking into the wood. Although this stuff, when it's newly applied, it will blacken your fingers after playing for a few days afterwards, but that's the way it is. So leave it sitting for a few minutes. The best time to drink a quick beer while you're waiting for that to soak in. And yet again, with your clean, dry rag down the neck, wiping up all the excess oil. And there we go. We've finished the hard work anyway. Oh, looks so nice and clean and new and shiny. And so the oil really brings out the grain in the fingerboard. Very happy with how this turned out. Now we're finished with the dirty part, we can go back inside now. Get out of my cold, dirty barn. Okay, after leveling and crowning frets, the ends of the frets are always going to be sharp. I think this comes from just filing around the tape, and the tape will leave an edge in the metal. I just use a normal nail file for this. You don't really need any specialist tools. A nail file is good because it's flexible, you can bend it into shape and get it exactly at the right angle you need to take that little sharp edge off the end of each fret. Of course, it's very important to tape around the area that you're working in as well to protect the binding and the fingerboard itself. So I normally do one or two at a time. Just move the tape down and do the next couple. So here we can see the difference. I take a bit of tissue paper, fold it up, and run it up and down the edge of the frets on the side of the neck that I haven't done yet. And there you see the tissue paper is shredded. In extreme cases that can even cut you, you've got to be careful. And now we'll do it on the side that I have done. And as you can see, smooth. And there we go, finished. Altogether, I would estimate that it took me perhaps 11-12 hours from the very first time I started to tape the guitar until finishing the fret dressing. Well worth the effort. Thanks for watching, guys. More videos coming up. Have a look at my YouTube channel for some of my original music, and like and subscribe if you want. Thanks a lot.